In late 2022 and through 2023, a different kind of frenzy took over the internet. It was not gold, it was not real estate, it was not even a traditional stock bubble. It was something stranger, something digital, something abstract, something that too many rookies looked like the next big investment opportunity they simply could not afford to miss. And that was the NFT boom. For a while, this one actually felt like the modern day gold rush. Something everyone wanted a piece of. Artists, celebrities, crypto traders, influencers, brands, and complete beginners all rushed in hoping they have found the next, digital frontier. But once the hype settled, a much harder question began to surface. Was it really a breakthrough in digital ownership, or was it just another internet-fueled bubble built on hype, speculations, and in many cases, outright nonsense? But to understand that, we need to ask a basic question. What is an NFT? Now, basically, an NFT or a non-fungible token is a unique digital token that exists on the blockchain, usually Ethereum, sometimes Solana, and unlike other currencies like the dollar or Bitcoin, which are fungible and interchangeable. NFTs are supposed to be unique. Now, in theory, that uniqueness actually allows a person to prove ownership of a digital item. That item could be art, music, documents, collectibles, or any other kind of attached metadata. And that was the key pitch. For the first time, people were told digital ownership could be verified, that an original digital asset could be bought, sold, and traced back to its creations. Artists could supposedly see and earn royalties. Collectors could supposedly own authenticated digital originals, and marketplaces like OpenSea, Blur, Magic, Eden, Reliable Foundation, and Super Rare made that process easier than ever. On paper, it actually sounded revolutionary, but in reality, for most people's NFT were not just understood as a technology, they were understood as money. Emphasis on easy money. And to be honest enough, that was the real fuel behind the boom, because the average buyer was not sitting there asking deep questions about digital provenance, creator royalties, or blockchain-based authentication. They were asking something much simpler. Can I buy this now and sell it later for more? And that was the real psychology of the market. And once this mindset actually took over, NFTs stopped being about art, they stopped being about utility, they stopped being about technology, and they became a giant speculation machine, a digital casino, a high-stake gambling environment without the normal restrictions of people, associated with gambling products. And suddenly, the internet was actually flooded with stories of overnight wealth. People saw Bored Apes selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars, some sold for millions. It just makes sense. People's NFT artwork sold for a huge amount through Christie's and made headlines around the world. Jadox's first tweet was turned into an NFT and sold for around $2.9 million. The buyer called it, the Mona Lisa of the digital world. And that one phrase alone tells you almost everything about the era, because people were no longer just buying digital files, they were buying narratives, they were buying status, they were buying clout, they were buying exclusivity, and more than anything else, they were buying the hope that someone even more irrational would come and pay a much higher price for nonsense.
Yo, I bought this crypto punk, it's called.
Yep.
This hoodie punk for $170K. We were all like, whoa, no way. I got an offer on this fucking hooded crypto punk for $700,000. I'm sitting in my computer like this. What the fuck? Oh, big man.
And it still wasn't enough.
Bro, I go, if I just go like this, I have $700,000 for this image, and I didn't sell it.
Right.
Because I believe I'm gonna sell it for like multi millions of dollars one day.
Now, basically, as an economist myself, this is what economists call the greater fool theory. You do not buy because something is fundamentally valuable. You buy because you believe a greater fool will appear later and take it off your hands for more. And for a while, that actually worked. Now, the rise of Bitcoin and Ethereum created the perfect storm. A lot of crypto investors were already sitting on a larger, paper gains. They had digital money. They wanted the next big thing. COVID era internet culture had pushed more people online than ever. Lockdown made digital life feel more real. And marketplaces like OpenSea made entering this space easier. They came, the social layer. Celebrities like Snoop Dogg, Paris Hilton, Jimmy Fallon actually brought NFTs into mainstream culture. Brands like Nike, Nike, Adidas actually got involved. NBA Top Shot helped normalize the idea that digital collectibles could have mass appeal. Owning a rare NFT became a type of online flex, like wearing a luxury fashion in a digital world. And this is where things get important. A lot of people did not buy NFT because they were beautiful. They did not buy them because they were meaningful works of art. They bought them because NFT signaled membership. It was kind of identity, it was community, and in a honest place, it was access. Now, many collections actually gave holders entry into token-gated Discord communities, private groups, events, networking circles, and exclusive online spaces. Now, your NFT became your badge, your profile picture became your social passport. You said you were, early, you were plugged in, you were part of something new. And yet, beneath all that excitement, the core question never went away. Why were people paying hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions for digital pictures that could be screenshotted in seconds? Now, that was my question. That was always one of the biggest cracks in the story.
I don't know, like, why would anybody buy an NFT? Like, it's a non-fungible token, and then you put it in a NFT wallet, and you have this thing. I'm like, but I have the same thing on my phone. I can take a screenshot of that NFT, and I have it. Like, what is the thing, the physical thing? I just don't understand how it worked. I don't understand how anybody looked at it and went, this is logical, I'm going to buy that.
Fortnite makes millions and millions and millions of dollars. Their whole model is built on skins and different in-game purchasable items.
Right.
You don't actually own anything. Ultimately, it just lives and dies with your computer. NFTs are sort of I guess the idea with NFT gaming or whatever is where you would actually own it.
Supporters will respond by saying that the screenshot is not the point. The image can be copied, yes, but the ownership of the official token on the blockchain cannot. To them, it was like the difference between owning a print of a painting and owning the signed original. And intellectually, that argument does make some sense. If art was sold as an NFT, then yes, in theory, it became easier to identify who owns the original verified piece. But the problem is that most of the NFT boom was never really about carefully crafted digital masterpieces entering museum level art history. It was mostly about mass-produced profile picture collections, thousands of near identical images, the same character, the same pose, the same blank expression, only this time with a different hat, a different background, a different pair of glasses, and a slightly different color. And people treated this as if it was the birth of a new artistic era. Now, to many outsiders, this one actually looked ridiculous, because what was exactly the value here? Was it the image itself? Was it the artistic genius? Or was it, the long-term utility? And in most cases, that's not it. So what was left? Speculation, statues, and hype. And that is why so many people still struggle to understand NFTs even now, because what buyers were actually purchasing was often not the art, but the idea surrounding the art, the possibility of future profit, the prestige of ownership, the social identity attached to a collection, the hope of belonging to an exclusive club, and the belief that prices would keep going up. It was scarcity theater. Digital items that could be copied endlessly were suddenly wrapped in blockchain certified ownership and treated like luxury goods, and once enough people agreed to believe in the illusion, prices became absurd. The market was not behaving like a rational pricing system, it was behaving like a mania. A Bored Ape could sell for enormous amount, not because the underlying picture was worth the amount in any traditional sense, but because the market narrative said it was. Crypto wealth actually poured in, media attention, amplified everything, celebrity endorsements added legitimacy, and FOMO did the rest. Now, nobody wanted to be the person who missed on the next Bitcoin. Nobody wanted to be the person laughing at something that later became worth millions. So people stopped asking whether these things actually made sense. They actually bought it. And as it happens in almost every speculative mania, the line between innovation and absurdity began to disappear. Now, the infrastructure behind this boom was massive. OpenSea became the dominant marketplace, functioning almost like the eBay of NFTs. Blur later arrived and focused on faster, more aggressive trading for advanced users. LooksRare tried to compete by rewarding traders with tokens, although some activities actually drew criticism for looking artificial. Rarible positioned itself as a creator-friendly platform, found Foundation and Super Rare leaned into the fine art artistic. Magic Eden became, the major force on Solana and beyond. Then there were the power centers. Now, Yuga Labs turned Bored Ape Yacht Clubs into a cultural phenomenon and later took control of major brands like CryptoPunk and Maybees. Lava Labs had pioneered CryptoPunk and one of the earliest tattoo symbols collection in the space. Deeper Labs helped bring NFTs to a more mainstream audience through NBA Top Shots, and Minukabo brands funded and built projects like NFT gaming and metaverse ideas. And auction houses like Christian and Sotheby's gave the whole scene a kind of cultural legitimacy by treating NFTs as a serious digital art. Then came the personalities. Now, people helped prove that NFT art could command traditional artwork attention. Gary loudly, promoted NFTs as a community and branded tools through VFriends. Kevin Rose pushed projects like Moonbirds. Snoop Dogg, Paris Hilton, and Jimmy Fallon helped normalize NFT in pop culture. Punk and Kuzumo shaped collector culture and the intellectual framing of digital ownership. OpenSea co-founders Alex and Devin built the marketplace infrastructure that powered much of the boom. Gray and Willie helped turn Bored Apes into a luxury internet brand. Matt Hall and John actually gave the world CryptoPunks. Roman helped make NFT mainstream through Dapper Labs. And Anatoly Yakovenko's Solana became the fastest, cheapest alternative for NFT activities outside Ethereum. And when you really break down the boom, you start to see a full machine. Some people actually built the road, some built the shop, some created the products, some promoted the products, and some simply gave the whole thing attention and cultural credibility. But eventually the fantasy started breaking down because most bubbles can only survive for as long as new buyers keep arriving. And in the case of NFTs, that constant flow of new believers was actually everything. Once the supply of excitement ran out, the weakness underneath became something that is actually impossible to ignore. The market actually became flooded with low quality copycat projects. Scams exploded, rug pulls became common. Creators would just hype products, sell out, then disappear. Trust started eroding, and the more low effort junk entered the market, the less believable the entire ecosystem actually became. Then the broader environment got worse. Interest rates actually rose globally. Speculative assets became less attractive. Inflation pressured investors. The crypto winter hit hard, and the collapse of major crypto institutions including FXT shattered confidence across the entire digital asset space. Now, NFTs was already built on a fragile momentum and they were hit especially hard. Now, prices collapsed. Some NFTs that had once sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars fell to a few $100s. Some of them that actually touched millions of dollars dropped to a fraction of that amount. Jack Dorsey's tweet NFT once bought for $2.9 million later received a bid for $6,800. That is the kind of collapse that reveals the truth very quickly. When demand disappears, what are you actually left holding? In many cases, not a productive asset, not a company, not cash flow, not even particularly useful software, just a receipt, a blockchain entry, and an image that nobody wants to buy anymore. And that was a real problem. Now, people confused a distribution method with a product. They saw a hype delivery system and assumed that anything delivered through it must automatically be valuable. But trash delivered over a revolutionary network is still trash.
Bro, I spent $500,000 on CryptoPunks because Gary Vee called me and goes, "This is the next Facebook." Now, mind you, in March, bro, when Gary Vee called all of his friends and said, "This is the next," I swear to God, I go, Gary. We're all like, "Yo, this guy's fucking crazy, dude. It's Gary Vee." He was right again. And so I stopped not listening to Gary. I did not listen to him, but just like everything, I wish I would have bought more.
Right.
Can you imagine, dude? If I sunk $5 million into punks in March, I'd be worth $50 million.
A proof of concept is not the same thing as a finished product, and gamblers bet on the proof of concept as it was a permanent asset class. That confusion may be the single best explanation for the NFT collapse, because NFT, at least in their most famous form, were never a finished cultural product. They were an experiment, a primitive first draft of digital ownership, a rough proof of concept, and instead of treating them that way, the market treated them like a blue chip investment that was never going to, end well. Now, to be fair, not every idea behind NFTs were automatically stupid. Now, gaming is one of the few that actually makes sense. If NFT could move between game functions as real in-game assets, unlock characters, items, and accessories across ecosystem, then they might offer something beyond pure speculation. Ticketing, digital membership, creator royalties, and provenance system also have some logic behind them. But that was not the story most people were buying into. Most people were not buying utility, they were buying internet prestige and resale dreams, and once those dreams died, so much of the market actually died with it. By 2024 and 2025, activity had representatively, falling dramatically, with the market dropping back towards something much closer to its pre-boom state. Mainstream attention vanished, active participation actually dried up, and the frenzy that once made NFTs feel unavoidable became just another reminder of how quickly internet hype can evaporate. Which brings us to the bigger question: was this all a scam? Now, the honest answer is slightly more complicated. Not every NFT project was the same. Some were genius experiments, some were creative tools, some tried to build real communities or products, while some explored real questions around digital ownership. But many projects were clearly opportunistic, many were low effort cash grabs, some were outright scams, and the wider market absolutely behaved like a speculative greed casino. That part was actually difficult to deny, because when the market is driven by hype, shallow scarcity, celebrity influence, vague promises, and a constant search for exit liquidity, the line between innovation and expectation becomes very thin. Now, critics also raise another uncomfortable possibilities, because NFT prices were so subjective, and because blockchain markets could be, tangled with. Some people question whether the space was vulnerable to manipulation, artificial prices, or other abuses. The concern was simple: when almost anything can be assigned almost any value in a thinly traded market, abuse becomes much easier to imagine. Whether viewed as a bubble, a scam, a casino, or a failed proof of concept, the result was the same. The boom ended, the prices collapsed, and a huge number of people were left holding digital assets that no longer meant much to anyone. So this leads us to another question: where are NFTs now? Now, basically, they did not fully disappear. The technology is actually still around. Some infrastructure survived, some behaviors actually pivoted, some use cases remain under development, but the cultural dream is gone. The mania is over. The era where a badly drawn ape could represent status, wealth, and internet prestige has mostly passed. What remains is a much quieter reality, and maybe that is the real legacy of the NFT boom. Not that it actually proved digital ownership or will change everything, but that it showed how easily people can confuse hype for value, how quickly technology can be wrapped in status and greed, and how often the internet takes a half-formed idea, sets it on fire with speculation, and calls it a feature. In the end, NFT were sold as a revolution, but for most people, or let's say most people, they turned out to be something much simpler: a gamble, a flex, a story, and eventually a crash.